The Second Great Awakening resounded for 30 years, sparking an intense period of evangelism in the South and West. It gave birth to numerous societies dedicated to the task of saving humanity from its own worst impulses. Around the same time, Joseph Smith formed the Mormon Church, though he did have much opposition. With its religious roots, Manifest Destiny found itself as Americans believed that they had got a God-given right to the Western territories. At this time, regional differences were distinct. The North was industrial, the West was agricultural, and the South believed slavery was necessary in their agricultural means. T. Adams was the next president, but born out of a corrupt bargain. Since no one won a majority, the election was decided in the House of Representatives, where Clay threw his support to Adams. Clay was rescinded by being named Secretary of State. The election of 1828 ushered in the age of Jacksonian democracy and the rise of the common man. In his presidency, he stomped down on the states for attempting to use the doctrine of nullification. In 1830, he pursued an aggressive Indian removal. In the later 1830s, black codes began to develop, prohibiting blacks from congregating and learning how to read. William Lloyd Garrison, with the Second Great Awakening, gave the notion that African Americans should not be oppressed. He started his own abolition newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831. Frederick Douglass began publishing a newspaper as well called The North Star. Harriet Tubman helped over 300 slaves escape via the Underground Railroad. In 1841, former military hero William Henry Harrison became the first Whig president. He died within a month, and Vice President John Tyler assumed the presidency. After Tyler, Polk became a president in 1844, and Taylor became the next Whig president in 1848. The Oregon Treaty, signed with Great Britain in 1846, allowed the United States to acquire peacefully what is now Oregon, Washington, and parts of Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. The Mexican-American War began in 1846 out of a conflict with expansion into Mexico. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the war, ceding Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada, and Utah to the United States. Also around this time was the birth of the feminist movement, with Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton holding the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. Susan B. Anthony also joined the fight, more so for voting rights. The slavery situation in the 1850s becomes more potent, especially when radical abolitionist John Brown led a raid on a pro-slavery camp, murdering 5. After both gangs roamed the territory, more than 200 people died in what was known as Bleeding Kansas. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln assumed the presidency. 3 months before his inauguration, however, South Carolina seceded from the Union, and within months, with Jefferson Davis as their leader, the Confederate States of America were born. Thus, the Civil War began. During the war, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, but also strengthened the National Bank and initiated the printing of the national currency. Lincoln, however, is most known for his Gettysburg Address, which came after one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. In September 1862, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, liberating all slaves residing in those states still in rebellion. Just before the Republican Convention, Lincoln lobbied for a party platform that called for the constitutional amendment prohibiting slavery. The result was the 13th Amendment. In 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Confederate forces, thus starting the process of Reconstruction. After Lincoln's shooting, Andrew Johnson became the next president, who would lead the country into Reconstruction. Johnson's Reconstruction plan called for the creation of provisional military governments to run the states until they were readmitted to the Union. Johnson's plan, however, failed because Johnson pardoned many of the Southern elite who were supposed to have been excluded from the reunification process. Civil Rights Round 1. In response to Johnson's failed plan, the Radical Republicans drew up the plan that came to be known as Congressional Reconstruction. Its first component was the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The most important part of the 14th Amendment prohibits states from depriving any citizen of life, liberty, or property in due process. The 15th Amendment, proposed in 1869, finally required states to enfranchise black men. To help out the newly enfranchised African Americans, the Freedmen's Bureau was constructed to help newly liberated blacks establish a place in the post-war society. The Freedmen's Bureau helped them find new jobs and housing and provided money and food to those in need. When it became evident that the government would not redistribute land, blacks looked for other ways to work on their own farms. The Freedmen's Bureau attempted to establish a system in which blacks contracted the labor to whites, but the system failed. African Americans preferred sharecropping, in which they traded a portion of their crop in return for the right to work in someone else's land. The origination of the Ku Klux Klan also suppressed the African Americans, making Reconstruction successful. The 1876 election, the Hayes-Tilden Compromise awarded Hayes with the presidency in exchange for the removal of federal troops from southern states, effectively ending Reconstruction. During the mid-1800s, westward expansion became popular in part due to the gold rush and government-sanctioned programs that allowed people to expand westward. Those moving westward had to ford rivers, hunt, and walk the Oregon Trail. From 1877 to 1900, the Machine Age and the Gilded Age coexisted. Thanks to technological advances such as the assembly line, businesses grew. And corporations aim for control of all facets of production, an idea known as vertical integration. Ideal vertical integration from the standpoint of business would include a central organization called the holding company that owned a controlling interest in the production of raw material, the means of transporting that material to the factory itself, and the distribution network for selling it. The logical conclusion is a monopoly, or complete control of an entire industry. Because of monopolization, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was passed to forbid any combination or conspiracy in the restraint of trade. Many business leaders disagreed, holding that in social Darwinism, only the fittest can survive. However, these business leaders were unfair as they didn't treat workers and children well in the factories. Many who worked for cheap labor in the factories were immigrants, but many of them were from Southern and Eastern Europe. Women at least cared for the immigrants, as many women started settlement houses for them. The only other way immigrants could find help were through political bosses and political machines, such as Tammany Hall, which required favors of the people for them to actually do work. Going back to businesses, since businesses did not treat their workers well, labor unions formed. However, some of these labor unions were suppressed, such as the Haymarket Square riots, and labor unions as a result became more specialized, some only providing help for those that are skilled. Like businesses, railroads also had unfair practices, and so the Interstate Commerce Act went to regulate unfair railroad practices. In this time, the Pendleton Act was also passed in response to charges on patronage and awarding of government jobs. Populists developed out of this time after the unfair railroad